What is up, Nerf Nation? I'm Naptown Nerf, and today we are going to be doing a tested episode of the brand new DRS cage, and this is a high crush setup similar to the Eclipse cage, and a very interesting new design by Dr. Snickers. So, as far as craftsmanship with the cage, it still has some burrs. It's not nearly as refined as his previous cages were. And I'm assuming he's doing that to cut down on cost and time so he can actually keep up with the demand of his cages. So I kind of understand the reasoning behind that. It's not bad by any stretch of the means. There's just a few flashing things and some burrs that you could probably clean up a little bit. But other than that, I think it's a very nice cage. And, you know, is still pretty high quality in my opinion. The new flywheels are a really nice blue color. They are very similar to an Eclipse wheel. The only thing I've noticed with the wheels is they have some scratches on the inside of them. And this is on both wheels. So I'm not sure why that is, if it had something to do with when it was shipped and the screws scratched it. But it doesn't seem that way because it has a scratch on each wheel, basically kind of in the same area. I mean, more or less. So that's a little disappointing, but hopefully that won't hurt anything. But nevertheless, this cage is actually very, very interesting to me because you can change the crush level depending on where you set your motors in these. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm thinking about just setting it up in the middle because I don't think the higher crush with this setup is going to be a good thing. It's probably just going to decapitate darts even more. The only question is, should I go with the least amount of crush? And maybe that would decrease decapitation levels. I really don't know. And unfortunately, it's just very hard to test this with just one, cage and flywheel setup. So, but we will be testing this with some worker motors. And I was sent these by NF Strike. I've looked at these motors before on my channel. I think they're very good motors. They have very interesting specs to them. They even come with some tips, which I think is important. So if you're not really familiar with these motors, I'll probably tell you everything on here today, but this is something very helpful, I think, that they send along with your motor. But there are some things in there that I kind of disagree with in terms of like how big your LiPo battery should be and whatnot. So I actually would more so recommend going to SILD.com and checking out if your LiPo is big enough to power these motors, because these do have a very high stall amp rating. You need a pretty powerful LiPo to power these. Speaking of LiPos, these are a 3S motor, so you want to use a 3S LiPo with them, and they have very high torque and very high RPMs. So I think that'll be a pretty nice motor to choose for this setup. It's not going to get the RPMs on 3S like a Fang Revamp does on 3S, but it will have quite a bit more torque. I'm actually thinking that the little bit lower RPMs might actually help us with this setup, as I've seen people test this with Fang Revamps and not really gain any performance from that. So let's look at these motors real quick. They have added a few things. They added a spacer with these motors, which is nice because you will need that for the worker cages. You need a spacer for those cages to set them up properly and to have the correct spacing of the flywheel on those. I don't know if we'll need these for this cage, but it is nice that they include that. You also need that for some 3D printed cages. You just really have to see if that ball bearing is level with the top of the cage. If it's sticking up from the top of the motor well there, then you need to have a spacer. These are a 132 motor, so that's kind of between 130, which is the stock standard size, and a 180, which is quite a bit longer than this. And this will require shell cutting in most blasters, so you have to kind of keep that in mind also. So like I was saying, this has a adjustable crush setup. So if you want it at the highest crush, which is actually 39 millimeters, you will be placing your motors at the lowest setting, which I believe is there. Then the middle, which is a normal place you usually put your motors, is 40 millimeters. And then at the top, like this, is 41 millimeters. So that's pretty cool and interesting that you can adjust without having to buy a different type of cage. The only downside is once you set your cage up, you really don't want to remove your flywheels after that, which is kind of unfortunate for testing purposes, but that's just the way it is. So I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to put these, probably at either 39 or 40, just for you know, hopefully maximum power, but also I want to save my darts, because if you're blowing up your darts, you're ripping the heads off, it's not very effective. So I may go with that 40 millimeter for that purpose, but these are a new material from the old DRS flywheels. They're making this out of acetyl, and it's supposed to have a very high impact resistance, which is good, I guess. DRS is claiming that this is getting up to 195 FPS, and he tested that on MTV Neo Hellcat motors and on Rhinos, so I'm assuming he got the highest FPS from the Neo Hellcats, but we will see if we can get that same performance with this worker motor. So let's go ahead and set this up, wire it up, and see what kind of performance we're going to get. All right, you guys, so I got the flywheels on and perfectly aligned thanks to Foam Blast's new tool here. This thing is amazing, and I highly recommend picking one up. They are like $5, very cheap and very useful. And it is absolutely crucial that you get these perfectly aligned. Even more important than any other sort of flywheel setup. I mean, these have to be in perfect alignment so they feed the dart perfectly through the cage. The flywheels look to be very consistent, very nice. They aren't rubbing, they aren't wobbling. They look very straight, which is awesome. We did have that problem with the first Eclipse cage, as the flywheels were not perfect. They wobbled a little bit, and that caused them to rub a little bit on parts of the cage, and obviously that's going to cause a lot of problems, especially in this setup. So the flywheels look amazing, and we'll go ahead and take a dart and run it through there. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll try to get a good video of it, but as it goes through, it doesn't look like there's a lot of pinching of the dart, which is good, because that can cause a rip along the side. And then you can kind of see how it looks there. Hopefully you can see that as it kind of goes through the center of the flywheel cage. It makes it kind of ovaled, but we will see how this does once we run power through it. All right, so I went ahead and wired up my cage, and we are actually going to be putting this in Sub-Zero. And Sub-Zero is going to get a little makeover, and I'm hoping that this is the engine that's going to do it for me, that's going to give me a little higher FPS and get me into that top end super stock, ultra stock range. But we will see here soon enough. But unfortunately, when I went and placed this in here, it does not want to sit down, and it will not fit without shell modification. Unfortunately, it is running into this front part here. Usually these cages have a little recessed area in the front here. This one does not, and I don't know why it's not fitting. Something that's machined and this expensive should not have these issues. They say this is the Gen 3.1. You think they'd have any sort of fitting issues figured out by then. They've obviously, DRS has done many cages for the Strife already, so you think you would know what would fit and what wouldn't, and it's really easy to test these things. So we're gonna have to cut back this front part here. I'm not sure exactly how much, but luckily I have Picatinny rails that go into this blaster, and that will kind of cover up that gap, so you won't be able to see that too much. All right, I have it installed and sitting down nicely. One other thing that's kind of strange to me is these screw ports are not wide enough for the screw to actually go down in. So you're not getting the depth that you could possibly get with these screws that mount your motors, and that might cause a little more vibration if it's not as secure, you know. So I may go back and widen those out, but that's just strange why they don't have those big enough, wide enough. Just doesn't seem like enough testing was done with this cage to make sure it fit and locked down in your blaster properly. And this is just with the Strife. This is supposed to also fit the Rapid Strike, so I have no idea how well it works there, but I guarantee you the screw issue is going to be the exact same. It may fit though without modification of the shell. It doesn't require too much. This is actually probably even more than what I needed to do, but you just kind of have to remove the front part here, and it's not that noticeable really once you modify it, and I just did it with some side cutters, and then if you have something like that to go in, you won't see it at all, obviously. So we'll go ahead, lock this down, and take it outside for the chrono test. All right, you guys, so I got the cage installed, and we have some AccuFakes and some Adventure Force waffles we're going to test out and see what kind of performance we're getting. Now, I haven't put too many darts through this yet, so it doesn't have a lot of foam buildup, so keep that in mind. It may get a little bit higher FPS as time goes on, but for now, we will see how it's doing. Go ahead and start out with the AccuFakes. This batch was having some issues losing heads with another high crush setup I tested recently, so we'll see if this batch is affected or not. 145, 142, lost a head, 146, 135, 146, 131, 134, 136, 138, another head lost, 162, 153, 145, 144, 150, 135, 158, 160, 166, 140, 143, 159, 164. So numbers actually got a little bit better as we went through, so maybe that foam buildup was helping out a little bit. Lost a few heads, but not a horrible amount, especially with AccuFakes, which are known to not be glued on great sometimes. So we'll go ahead and try the Adventure Force waffles. They should have a little bit better glue on them and should hold up a little better, so we'll see. 163, 168, 165, 166, 168, 169, 165, 170, 167, 169, 174, 173, 173, 175, 177, 168, 171, 173, 169, 171, 177, 171. Pretty darn good performance, I think. I mean, that's pretty reasonable. 200 FPS out of a flywheeler single stage is, I still think, unless it's maybe brushless, is not really that reasonable. I mean, we could have gone down a little tighter with the crush and maybe you could have hit 200 once or twice, but consistency, I have a feeling, would be lacking, and also dart heads would more likely come off, obviously, the more crush you go. So I kind of like that 40 millimeter, which was the midpoint between the 39 and 41, but it is definitely cool. You can change that up. So if someone else has this cage and does some testing, let me know what kind of numbers you're getting. Definitely interested in that. But obviously the Adventure Force waffles perform better, I think mainly because they were just glued on better than the AccuFake. So pretty darn good performance. We are going to test the accuracy now. All right, so I only lost 2 heads from the AccuFakes and none from the Adventure Force waffles, so that's pretty darn good. Range was really nice. I even got up to 100 feet with some of those darts. So we will go ahead and see what kind of effective range and accuracy this has, more or less. Obviously we're outdoors, there's wind involved, there's obviously a human element involved, but this is definitely not going to be as accurate as a normal Dr. Snickus cage. This is not a canted setup, it's straight. It doesn't have the dart guide, or at least as much of one as the other DRS cage has, so we'll just see how it does. So we definitely lost a few more dart heads there the second time through, but only I think 4 flew off. Not great, but we'll see how the Adventure Force waffles do, and I'll step up a little closer. That was probably about 60, 65 feet, so we'll get up to about 50 and see how much better that helps.
So I'd say that's pretty good, not terrible by any stretch of the means. I actually think I hit more with the AccuStrike darts than the waffles. They might be a tad bit more accurate, the AccuStrikes over the AccuFakes over the waffles, but pretty good performance. Definitely not as accurate, but definitely not bad accuracy by any stretch of the means. So pretty impressive. I'm gonna go back inside and I'm gonna give you my final thoughts.
All right, you guys. So I think the performance out of this thing is pretty darn good. Maybe not 200 FPS, but 175 I think is decent. 170, 175, that's FDL levels of power. That's pretty darn impressive, especially using the strife geometry. I don't really see you being able to get consistent 200 FPS out of a non-brushless system, and even out of a brushless system, single stage, that's still probably pushing it a bit, but nevertheless, very impressive. The cage performed well. I did have some decapitations from those AccuFakes, but absolutely none from the Adventure Force waffles, and I ran brand new darts through them the first time around for the FPS test, and then for the accuracy so-called test, which it isn't really, I know isn't a great accuracy test, but it gives you a general idea of how accurate it is, and gives me a general idea of how accurate it is. I would say accuracy was pretty good, but not amazing, not like a DRS cage. But you're getting higher FPS from it, and that's kind of a give and take there. So, but yeah, I think the darts held up pretty well in terms of the Adventure Force waffle. So if I was running this setup, I would definitely probably recommend using those, or something similar that has better glue. Poorly glued darts are probably gonna lose their head. So if you're running this setup at your local Nerf club and you use loaner darts, I would recommend bringing some of your own, because with high crush setups like this, you're gonna blow heads off of darts, and I know at my club I don't appreciate that if somebody's running super high crush. If you go ahead and buy 400 Adventure Force waffles, I think you're gonna be golden. So now the major downfall for me for this cage is having to modify your strife. That's very disappointing. I don't think there should have been a need to have to do that, but that being said, I think I would prefer that over what we found with the Gen 1 Eclipse cage, and that having a cage that pushes back into the mag well that doesn't work well with certain types of magazines. So this seemed to work great with the Worker 22s and with in-strike mags I tested off camera. So no issues there. Now, when it comes to the motors that you use, I would say that this is a good option. Obviously, if you're okay overvolting motors, a fan revamp is also probably a pretty good option. I would guess that you're going to get similar performance. I don't know. This might have gotten better performance. It's really hard for me to test this with only one cage. I can't take the wheels on and off because this is the only set of wheels I have. It would have been nice to test, the different crush levels and compare and contrast those, but I will put a link down below to where you can pick up these cages and where you can pick up these motors. Thanks to NF Strike for sending me these motors, because that was really, I think, in my opinion, the best motor for this setup, because it is a 3S motor that has high RPMs and does not need to be overvolted. So obviously, if you guys end up purchasing this and testing it with different motors or different crush levels, let me know what kind of data you're getting. Obviously, you could probably get higher FPS numbers using lighter darts, but obviously effectiveness from those darts, like a Nerf Elite dart, is probably not going to be super great. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a like, and think about supporting me on Patreon, as it helps me do more videos like this. These are very time consuming and expensive, obviously, to do for me, but I do enjoy doing them, so that's why I do them for you and the community. So thank you so much for watching. Smash that like button, please subscribe, and as always, peace out.